Today, we're going to be going over question 49 of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. That question can be found in page 669 of the Blue Trinity Hymnal, if you don't have it memorized. Question 49 asks us this question: which is the second commandment? Answer: the second commandment is, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me, and keep my commandments. So, growing up, I always thought that God was just repeating himself when he gave the second commandment. When I read it, I just figured that, God already told us not to have any false gods, and basically now he was just taking it one step further and telling us not to even build false images. I basically had this idea that he was almost like a dad with a teenage daughter when he tells her, I don't want you seeing that young boy, and I better not see any pictures of him on your wall. How wrong was I? So let's take a look at the second commandment. What do we notice about what it forbids? So let's read. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Okay. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. So what is Moses describing here when he says bow down and serve? Well, these are acts of worship. When you have an image you are bowing down to, you are engaging in a form of worship towards that image. As Thomas Vincent in his book, The Shorter Catechism, explained from Scripture rightly notes, the worship required in the first commandment hath a respect unto the object of worship, whereby we are bound to worship the true God and none else. The worship required in the second commandment hath a respect unto the means of worship, whereby we are bound to worship God according to the way and means of his own appointment and no other. So this commandment deals specifically with worship. I want to start off first by reading from Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 29 to 32. And pay attention to what's being said here. When the Lord your God cuts off before you the nations which you are going in to dispossess, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, beware that you are not ensnared to follow them, after they are destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods, that I may also do likewise? You shall not behave thus toward the Lord your God, for every abominable act which the Lord hates, they have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Whatever I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to nor take away from it. So pay attention to what is being said here. In particular in verse 30, when it says, beware that you're not ensnared to follow them, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods, that I may also do likewise? It doesn't say what gods do these nations serve, that I may serve, but it says, how do these nations serve their God, that I may do likewise? So in this passage, this is dealing specifically with the fact that God did not want the Israelites to mimic the type of worship that the nations around them were following. See, the reason for that is because worship matters to God. God, being the creator and ruler of this world, does not want for us to worship him how we think or feel we ought to worship him. See, oftentimes, especially in our self-centered culture, we worship God based on our preferences, and somehow we convince ourselves that God is honored in us praising him by doing what we want to do in worship. We think that just because we're attending church and worshiping God in church, that this absolves us from the practices that we bring into our worship. I mean, we're attending church, right? I mean, that's better than majority of Americans today. So what's wrong if we spice up service a little bit just to keep myself engaged? I think I've used this example before in the past, but I want to give it again because it really does highlight and paint why it does matter. So imagine for 1 second that I wanted to throw a party for my wife because my wife is awesome. And I wanted to celebrate how awesome and great she was. So I tell my wife, hey, I'm going to throw you a party. And as I start to plan this party, I realize, you know what? I really love football. What what would be great for a party for Deborah would be for me to have screens of football games played. Man, Deborah would really be honored by me watching football. And you know what? I know some of the guys that are coming love playing pool. And it'd be great if we just set pool tables to play pool for Deborah. Gosh, I know she would love that. And also, man, you know what? I know what would be great is if we had a little cigar lounge to smoke cigars and drink beer. Man, Deborah would really be pleased by this. Now, in throwing this party and planning this party, even though I'm convincing myself that Deborah's going to be honored by all the things that I'm doing, in reality, all I'm doing is creating a party that I like and just saying that it's for Deborah. So much in the same way, when it comes to worship, somehow we seem to convince ourselves that we can do what we want in worship and somehow fool God into thinking that we're bringing honor to him. So I want to give a couple of examples in the scriptures of people who took for granted God and worship. Let's start first by Nadab and Abihu. Leviticus chapter 10, 1 through 3. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "It is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I will be treated as holy, and before all the people, I will be honored." So Aaron therefore kept silent. So what exactly was it that Nadab and Abihu did? They offered fire, but not just fire, it was strange fire. It was fire that God did not prescribe for them to bring. And as a result of that carelessness in the type of fire that they brought, God killed them. Next example I want to give is King Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 15, 1 through 23. Pay attention to this. Then Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you as king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord." In verse 3, "Now go and strike Amalek and utterly destroy all that he has, and do not spare him, but put to death both man and women, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." So Saul defeated the Amalekites from Hebel as far as you go to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He captured Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were not willing to destroy them utterly, but everything despised and worthless that they utterly destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, "I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my command." Verse 13, Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Blessed are you of the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord." But Samuel said, "What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we have utterly destroyed." Then Samuel said to Saul, "Wait and let me tell you what the Lord has said to me last night." And he said to him, "Speak." Samuel said, "Is it not true that though you were little in your own eyes, and you were made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and said, 'Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they exterminated'? Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord, but rushed upon the spoil and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord?" Then Saul said to Samuel, "I did obey the voice of the Lord, and went on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and have brought back Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took some of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the choicest of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal." Samuel said, "Has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and insubordination is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." See, here you have King Saul, who after destroying the Amalekites, took some of the best sheep, oxen, and spoil to devote to God. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, what did God command? He commanded in verse 3 to utterly destroy every single thing that Amalek had. Now, we could argue whether or not Saul was being sincere in his reasoning for holding on to some of the best sheep and oxen. However, when Samuel rebuttals Saul, he does not rebuttal on the basis of Saul being disingenuous, but on the basis of Saul thinking that God would prefer offerings and sacrifices, which are forms of worship, over and against Saul's obedience. Matthew Henry says this in regards to this chapter. God appointed these cattle to be sacrificed to him in the field, and therefore will give those no thanks that bring them to be sacrificed at his altar. For he will be served in his own way, according to the rule he himself has prescribed. Nor will a good intention justify a bad action. See, in our day and age, we think that because we are sincerely doing something, that it covers over whether or not what we're actually doing is in obedience to God. Should we be sincere in our worship to God? Of course. Should that sincerity circumvent obedience? Absolutely not. And the last example, and I'll quickly read this. This is Uzzah in 2 Samuel chapter 6, 1 through 7. Now when David gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and David arose and went with all the people who were with him to Baal Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the very name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned above the cherubim. They placed the ark of God on a new cart, that they might bring it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were leading the new cart. So they brought it with the ark of God from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Ahio was walking ahead of the ark. Meanwhile, David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with all kinds of instruments made of fir wood and lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. But when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out toward the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen nearly upset it. And the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and God struck him down there for his irreverence, and he died there before the ark. So here we have Uzzah being killed for touching the ark. Why did God do this? Because he was not supposed to touch the ark. Now, it's not like Uzzah was walking around saying, hey, let me just grab this ark to touch. No. The ark presumably was about to fall, and Uzzah was wanting to reach out to the ark to keep it from falling. But God killed him because it was not him who was to touch the ark. As Matthew Henry noted earlier, a good intention does not justify a bad action. See, in each of these examples, to our eyes, it may seem that the offense that brought about the wrath of God was minor. But the fact of the matter is that God does not take lightly holy matters. Therefore, if God takes these matters seriously, so should we. The second commandment is a reminder to us that worship matters to God. Not only are we to worship him, we are to worship him as he tells us to worship him. See, if our desire is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, then worshiping God according to his commands should not be an issue. But if we feel as though God is being very rigid with us by not giving us the wiggle room to worship him according to our desires, see, the problem is not with God's strictness. The problem is with our own rebellious hearts, us wanting to do what we want versus wanting to do what pleases and glorifies God. Now, over the next few weeks, as we study the second commandment, one thing will be very clear. Worship matters to God. Not just in that we are worshiping him, but also in how we worship him. Now, that being said, let us rise for the recitation of the Ten Commandments.